Shalom. I'm very, very honored to make this short video for the organization Epic Families. I went to their website. I was so moved. I was so impressed that I literally was shedding tears. Epic deals with two major issues that come together. The issue of raising a child in very confusing and difficult times, superimposed with the awesome adjustment difficulties of Aliyah, a new culture, a new language, unfamiliar life to navigate. And how do children get through this process? What tools can we give to parents to help their children? What outside mentors can come and give a child chizuk and recognition that the child matters? There is literally nothing that I can imagine that is more important than this Avaita. And I personally want to give a grace yashakayach to Rabbi Goodman and the entire wonderful staff for what Epic Families are doing, for Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, for Klal Yisrael, for parents, for children. And B'ezras Hashem, may this organization go Mechayel El Chayel. We're approaching Shavuos. We are now in the period of Sfiras HaOmer. And the parsha that we always read before Shavuos is Parshas Bamidbar. And Parshas Bamidbar deals with the counting of Bnei Yisrael, Rosh Chodesh Iyar, 1 month after the Hakamas HaMishkan. There is a counting of Bnei Yisrael. But Rashi points out there actually was a counting several months earlier in the aftermath of the Chet HaEgel, after Yom Kippur. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes down, the Jewish people are actually counted. That's an unrecorded census. And Rashi goes through the question, how could there be the same number of people between Yom Kippur and Iyar? Did not anybody become 20 years old in between, which would raise the count? Interesting question. We're not going to get into that right now. But the question is, why is there a need to count the Jewish people just 6 or 7 months apart? L'may nafkamina. So Rashi says, repetitive counting of Am Yisrael is a sign of chiba, a sign of love, just like a miser will count his gold over and over and over again. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves to count the precious Am Yisrael, where each one is like a diamond. That is Rashi. But I would like to suggest a thought, which is based on a Ramban, in which, although the Jews were counted after Yom Kippur, and the Jews are counted Rosh Chodesh Iyar just 6 or 7 months later, there is a difference in the way they were counted. In Macharas Yom Kippur, it was a very anonymous count. People dropped a half shekel into the pushka, and Moshe and Aaron simply added the half shkolim, and they determined the population. People did not introduce themselves by name, and we don't even have a tribal record. How many Reubens, how many Shimons, how many Issachars? Don't know. We simply have the pushka of the half shkolim, and we count it. So we would describe the first minyan as anonymous, homogeneous, not focusing on individuality. The second minyan is very, very different. First, the Ramban says on the word mispar shemot, which he translates as not just meaning the counting of names, but the declaration of names, although this also was through a half shekel. But each person personally gave their half shekel to Moshe and Aaron, and they introduced themselves by name. So it's no longer an anonymous counting, but each person comes and says, I am a Yitzchak, I am an Aaron, I am a Moshe. I don't know if there were other kids who were named Moshe in those days or whatever it would be. There is much more a focus on individuality. And there is, of course, a tribal breakdown. how many Reubens, how many Shimons. And this suggests that there are two different ways of forming communities. How do you create Achdus? How do we create unity? How do we create Avat Yisrael? One way is by homogeneity. Everybody's the same. And in the aftermath of the Cheder Egel, which was similar to a Holocaust, we need to rebuild. So sometimes we have to sacrifice individuality. But that's only a short-term strategy. When we're dealing with the permanent creation of Am Yisrael, our communities must be predicated on an appreciation of diversity, of difference, of uniqueness, of individuality. One might describe these two methods of Achdus, if I could use the gastronomic analogy, as a cholent versus a salad bowl. In a cholent, you put together the meat and the barley and the beans, gets cooked together, and let's imagine, maybe it's not so appetizing, what a cholent looks like by Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of the next week. All of the ingredients merge, called a melting pot. A melting pot is an achdus that is based on sameness. But you look at a salad, you have lettuce and tomatoes and peppers, different colors, different textures. The beauty of the salad lies in the different colors and the different tastes and the different textures. The Torah is telling me that the ultimate long-term achdut of Klal Yisrael is not an achdut that negates individuality, but an achdut that fosters individuality and uniqueness. Each shevet had its own derech in Avodas Hashem. That's why Shvatim are so important. One might say, why do we have the concept of Shvatim? Isn't the only thing that matters there are Jews? Yidden. Reuven, Shimon, Lamai Nafkamina. The answer is no. Every shevet had a unique personality. Every shevet had a unique mission. Hashem does not want communities based on sameness. Hashem wants communities in which each individual, both in terms of a shevet and, as the Ramban said, Mispar Shemot, in terms of the individual, shines. And the Medrash indeed says that the beauty of a garden lies in the different flowers and the different colors of the garden. A garden with only one type of flower is not going to be as beautiful as a garden with different colors and different flowers. And thus, the first minyan of homogeneity, anonymity, obliteration of individuality may have been necessary as a short-term response to a traumatic event. But it is not the achdus of the permanent constituency of Am Yisrael. I think this message is very, very significant in chinuch. The ideal system of chinuch is indeed v'shinantam levanecha. Every parent would homeschool their child. After all, every child is different, and a child needs someone who cares and loves that child. Chanoch l'nar al pi darko, Shlomo Melech says every child must be educated according to their derech, their personality, their talents. But we have to have schools. L'maisa already in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, Yeshua ben Gamla realized that there were children who didn't have parents. There were children whose parents were not able to teach them for whatever the reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, educational reasons. So we have schools. And in a school, by definition, there is homogeneity. You got to have a common denominator. But ultimately, we have to strive to create that the teacher-student should be like the parent's child, to bring out individuality, to bring out uniqueness. Every child has kochos. Every child has unique strengths. And the unique strengths might not always be recognized in a standardized curriculum. By definition, the standardized curriculum focuses on one particular aspect of intelligence: analytical, reasoning, and textual dexterity. Call that the Gemara cup. And Baruch Hashem, that's a wonderful, valuable trait. But some children are not necessarily totally gifted in that trait. But Hashem gave them other milas: emotional empathy, sensitivity, interpersonal understanding. But those traits are sometimes ignored, not valued, not even noticed. And children may go through life thinking that they're failures, when in fact they are magnificent successes within the kochot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them, within their individuality, in which they contribute to Klal Yisrael. I remember reading years ago about the Maharal of Prague, the great Maharal. Apparently had one of his grandchildren, I guess today we would say had a learning disability. In those days they didn't use that sprach, they didn't use that vocabulary, but had difficulty understanding Gemara, wasn't chapping Gemara. But he had a tremendous spatial and visual intelligence, and he could construct models of things. He was a craftsman, he was a silversmith. So the Maharal had him learn about korbanos and avoda and the complicated details of the building the Mishkan, and then in Nach, the Beis HaMikdash, by making physical models. And through the building of those physical models, the child was able to master difficult sugyas and kudshim that even perhaps the more learned and brilliant minds were not able to grasp. This was Chanech l'nar al pi darkei. Find the talent of the child. Find his ability. Find his interest. Find his passion. And then you will get greatness, because you will get enthusiasm and joy. And thus, if you think about it, chinuch, whether it's chinuch of our children, chinuch of our talmidim, chinuch is not so much about remaking somebody as it is uncovering the kochos that are already there. You know, an artist, a sculptor will sometimes say, and not being an artist, I cannot say that I fully understand this, that when they make a sculpture from a piece of wood, they say, I'm not really making the sculpture. The sculpture is in the wood. I'm just removing the impediments. I'm just removing the blockages, so that which is in there is able to emerge. Again, I cannot say I fully understand how that works with a piece of wood, but I think that's very much the case in the chinuch of our children. I need to kind of expose what is already there. There is a derech in that child's neshama, his pathway to God, his uniqueness, his talent. My goal, as Shlomo HaMelech says, is to uncover that talent. Yes, I of course acknowledge there is going to be a common denominator. Obviously, people have to learn Chumash, Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha. I'm not suggesting that we dispense. But at the same time, we need to build up our children in all of the areas in which they are unique, in which they are special, to foster and appreciate those talents. I think there is well, number one, some say that this is one of the remazim of bris milah. We enter our children into Yiddishkeit by the bris. But what is the bris? The bris is to cut and remove impediments and blockages. We don't put anything on the child. We remove the impediments so the true essence comes out. I believe that in the special education community, not necessarily Torah-based, but there's a beautiful story, beautiful parable. I'm not sure if I recall it, that somebody decided to make a school for animals. Now, the problem was that some animals knew how to swim, but they couldn't climb trees, and some could climb trees and they couldn't swim, and some could dig holes and they couldn't do the other thing. And it was thought, oh, that's no good. We need to create a uniform, standardized curriculum so that all of the animals will have all of the talents. And therefore, we have to force the squirrel to swim, and we have to force the snake to climb a tree or whatever it would be. And what was the measure of success? That at the end of the year, instead of each one having an area of excellence, everybody was mediocre in everything. And Baruch Hashem, that is successful. We've destroyed the spirit, and we've created a mindless conformity. This is not a service to the child. This is not a service to Klal Yisrael. This is not a service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kishem shepritzufeim einam shaves. Just as God made every child with a different face, every person, kach deyeseim einam shaves. Hashem made every person, every child, every person, with a different personality, a different talent, a different ability. It's our job to unlock that greatness. This is a challenge, going back to the beginning of my remarks. This is a challenge under the best of circumstances. But when you have Olim, whether it's in the United States or any other country, where a kid is uprooted from a familiar surrounding and is put into a different society where they may not know the language that well, even if they've had a chinuch, but they may not be fluent in Ivrit. I myself am not totally fluent in Ivrit. And a different type of social network where, the Israeli personality might be a little rougher and tougher, in which the child's individuality is not being acknowledged, in which sometimes they may be part of a large school in which the parents themselves may be so overwhelmed with their own adjustment difficulties, which are real, that they can't be as well-meaning as they are. And of course, parents love their children. But if the parents themselves are tense, they will not always be able to give the child what the child needs. So there are children that are heartbroken, that are lonely, that just shut down, that feel abandoned. And their inner greatness is being squashed and squelched. And as a result, all that they could become will just never happen. But Chanoch Lenar al Pi Darkei, the message is, our purpose is not to make everybody this mediocrity, but to highlight that which is unique about a person, to highlight that which is special about a person, so they will be able to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended them to do. Now, the great Rav Yerucham of Mir, the great Mashgiach of Mir, once said that the person who is not aware of his faults is a very foolish person. If I think I'm perfect, if I think I have no chesronos, then I'm pretty stupid. But the person who is not aware of his greatness is even worse. He's a tragic person, because he'll never have the tools, or he will not know of the tools that will enable him to achieve his potential. So again, I do want to give a tremendous Yasher Koyach to Epic for the work that it's doing, to help children realize their potential, which of course is the greatest possible joy and nachas that parents can get. May you go, may chayil el chayil, a chaydesh toiv, and a good Yom Tov. Thank you.